Hey, you guys, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and jump into chapter 2, part 2, The Blessed Child of Two Addicts. The poem went on from there, all of it captivating. I love the title of this poem from the moment I heard it because I knew it to be true, even as a child. When Rob performed, he always came alive and shook off whatever burdens he carried. As an adult, I received the gift of a handwritten book of poetry from him. It remains one of my favorite keepsakes today. Rob also gave me one of the most important lessons of my young life. I was 7 years old when he taught me about the power of honesty. It might have been fall. The day was excessively bright and sunny. The weather was pleasant with a slight chill, and we were taking a walk to Mondawmin Mall to go shopping or maybe to a movie. As we walked along, I couldn't help but wonder why Rob was wearing such a big coat. It wasn't that cold outside. He had his hair in a brush back afro that looked cool, but he also looked contemplative. That wasn't unusual, but today he seemed really deep in thought. I felt real grown walking at my father's side because he didn't feel the need to hold my hand. That's another thing I liked about Rob, how he never related to me like an incompetent child, and he was never on some fake, I'm playing daddy now, and I'm with you flow when he decided to see me. I respected that. He gave me life, but in his presence, I was my own person. That would be the one bit of parenting advice from him that I would carry with me. As we were walking along out of the quiet, I heard him say, "Listen, I'm a drug addict and a criminal." He paused for a moment. "So I can't be your father." My reaction was a relieved acceptance. He wasn't telling me anything I didn't already know. I respected his honesty. Finally, an adult in my life was not afraid to lift the wool from my eyes and just be straight. My father gave me the lasting ability to withstand and eventually appreciate harsh truths. Painful though it may seem, the finality of his statement never conjured the sadness you might expect. I didn't know what it was like to have a father in the first place because he hadn't been around, so I had nothing to miss. Whatever devastating effects would come from this inability to be a father to me didn't present themselves for many years, especially in my intimate relationship with men. Truth can be a blessing, but I can't overlook how it can be a burden to a 7-year old. When I saw my cousins with their dads, I might have missed having a father who could do daddy stuff with me, but I resolved early that maybe that kind of daddy love just wasn't meant for me. I found God in myself and I loved her. I loved her fiercely. Nato child, Natsaki Shang. Many of us are born to parents and families who are already in the mix of trying to survive, withstand, move through traumas of their own. So do some more easily than others, while most of us, as children, are left caught in the storms of our family's dysfunction. A lot of us had to feel the brunt of it, which left us feeling unsafe, unwanted, uncared for, unlovable. For many of the adults in our lives, this was not the intention, but this fact remains. Consequently, this left us with the need to find solutions to remedy painful circumstances. Unfortunately, those same solutions can show up in our adult lives as repeated cycles of the dysfunction we tried to escape in our childhood. It's okay. We must comfort ourselves with the fact that as children, we did the best we could within circumstances out of our control, which left us to believe we weren't enough. In the process, we were inevitably robbed of some of the most precious aspects of ourselves: our joy, our trust, our innocence. We in turn learn to reject those qualities within ourselves. As adults, we no longer have to do that. When we allow the little one within to heal and understand that we are enough to take care of ourselves, we no longer have to demand and be blameful when others can't care for us. We realize through self care that we are enough to love ourselves thoroughly. I eventually learned to reclaim and honor my vulnerability. One of the many ways was to buy stuffed animals and allow the kid in me to enjoy them, cry with them, sleep with them, be reacquainted myself, by reacquainting myself with the tender one within. I learned the power of my vulnerability. Can you find the moment when you began to reject the precious child within yourself? You could take that further and write a list of the parts of yourself you might want to reclaim that you didn't feel safe enough to embrace as a child. Give yourself the freedom to decide how you would like to express those parts of yourself on your journey to reclaim them. Chapter 3: Leaving the Garden. Bullying became a problem in the second grade. There was this big boy who had a mouthful of crooked teeth and who would not leave me alone. He got in my face one day and threatened, "You better bring me $10 tomorrow or I'm going to beat you up." $10? Where am I going to get $10? In desperation, I took the money from a place where my grandfather kept cash. It felt wrong, for sure, but as soon as I paid the bully, he backed off. His face lit up like I was his best friend. "You really got me the money." And he took off. He made the mistake of bragging on the playground and showing off his money. This came to the attention of the principal, who asked him where he got the $10. He didn't hesitate to say, "Jada Pinkett." Grandmother received the call from the school and was initially appalled. There had to be a mistake. But when I tearfully told grandmother the story, she knew I must have been very intimidated to have stolen money from my grandfather. The bottom line for Marion Banfield was that the school could have done more to prevent the situation from escalating. In her view, every child ought to feel safe at school. Her conclusion was that I should go to private school. I wasn't sure, because by this point, I reached the conclusion that there was a vast difference between how I was educated at home and how I was educated at school. Conventional structure did not work for me. My mother's t- my mother's feeling was that I was just bad as hell at school. She felt strongly that I should at least be in a school setting with black teachers, black principals, and black kids, and that was damn near non-existent with private schools. But she was willing to explore options for my sake. Marion arranged for me to have a trial with the monastery school so they could assess me. My first assignment was to write a short story and illustrate it. Sounded fun. I decided to write a story reminiscent of authors I discovered on Mommy's bookshelf, like Stephen King. Such books were not necessarily appropriate for my age, but I loved horror and ghost stories all my life. So I wrote one that involved someone getting stabbed in a cave by an unknown monster, and I included a drawing. The teacher conducting my interview was disturbed, even though I could have not been prouder. First, I was not protected from bullying, and now I was misunderstood by adults who didn't know me. My attitude was, "No, there's nothing wrong with me, and you people are wrong." Was there something wrong with Stephen King? No, he was a genius. Although I ultimately was accepted, I didn't last long at Montessori. Mommy and Marion believed I needed more structure because, ironically, I went from being bullied at one school to running the show at this one. All I wanted to do was play, talk, and tell the teachers what I would and would not do. Our next attempt was another private school. The one-day trial experience there wasn't terrible, but I was not used to an all-white environment and felt like an outsider. As soon as I saw Mommy, I told her I don't like it here. Thank goodness, I wasn't given enough time to prove how bad as hell I was. Next, Mommy and Grandmother agreed upon a happy medium, a public school, Mount Washington Elementary, where the faculty and student body was diverse. This school was not too far from Grandmother's neighborhood, and even closer to the welcoming home of Uncle Leslie, Aunt Marcia, and Cousin Tiffany, where I walked every day after school. The situation was better, but not trouble free. Being small, I got picked on all the time, by boys and girls alike. One day, on the playground in the fourth grade, a much bigger girl approached me and, for no damn reason, grabbed a chunk of my hair and pulled so hard I thought she would pull it out by the roots. When I returned home to grandmother's house that evening, Aunt Karen was there, and I told her all about it and asked if she could come to school with me the next day. Karen got that look in her eye that I sometimes saw with Adrian. She said, "Don't come up in here telling me about some girl pulling your hair. Somebody touches you, make sure they don't do it again." I was quiet. My Aunt Karen was so beautiful, and she was just as tough. She had to be. In school, my aunt and my mother were both constantly having to prove, "Don't let these folks fool you." Karen had survived a few abusive relationships. At one point, had her jaw broken by a boyfriend who Adrian chased down with a baseball bat, and then had her son, my cousin Brett, take, taken from her by an ex. I will never forget hearing my aunt screaming for her child, my 1 year old cousin screaming for his mother, and my mother screaming at the police to do something. Aunt Karen didn't know where Brett was for 2 years. The result of these traumas was that my Aunt Karen and my mother carried the burden in their veins of "I'm not to be played with." The ghost of their grief and the roots of their aggression left impressions on me, giving me permission to protect myself when necessary. And I learned by default whatever violence I could muster would keep me from my hurt, physical and emotional alike. Karen's words stayed with me. I would, of course, avoid a fight if I could, and I never went looking for one. But as I got older, part of survival made fights unavoidable. And if anyone wanted to test me, I had no problem meeting the call. A lot of things happened in the summer of 1981. One of them was that my mother had started nursing school. Now that we had moved back in from with my grandparents, she made the effort to spend time with me on weekends, spontaneously announcing outings like, "Jada, we're going to the beach, and off to Ocean City we will go." One of the lasting gifts that Adrienne gave me was her love of music, all kinds of music, and that love came to live in my bones. Mommy loved everything: R&B, pop, a touch of rock, disco, and even country. She loved Kenny Rogers. On Saturday mornings, whenever we cleaned our living space in the attic, it was a party. Tina Marie's Square Biz or Cheryl Lynn's Got to Be Real joyfully filled the air. No matter where we lived, Mommy always had a record player. Mommy bought vinyl records, and vinyl became my thing too, to the point that as soon as I could get a job, it would be a buy albums of my own. My first purchase, Prince. Going to go see the Raiders of the Lost Ark with my mom was a spur of the moment adventure. I was 9, almost 10, but not prepared for those hideous, horrific, face melting images escaping from the ark. Mommy was going to go out afterward, and when she dropped me off at my grandparents', I admitted, "I don't want to sleep upstairs by myself tonight. I told you it was going to be scary, but I'm really scared." Mommy walked me into the house and promised, "I'll see you in the morning." "Okay. Can you see if I can sleep with grandmother tonight?" I pleaded. We tiptoed into my grandparents' dark bedroom, and Adrian leaned around the doorway whispering, "Ma, Ma." Marion sat up right out of sleep. "What's wrong?" "Jada is scared to sleep upstairs. Can she stay in your room tonight?" "Oh, for crying out loud." My grandfather stirred, glanced at us, but chose to stay quiet and go back to sleep. My grandmother might not have been happy about getting up and preparing for Chase Lounge for me to sleep on, but she didn't leave me hanging. Even if it didn't suit her rule that children should never sleep in bedrooms other than their own. The fact she made an exception and allowed me to sleep on her beloved Chase was not at all lost on me. It was in this era grandmother began to weave in reminders about the importance of not depending on a husband or any man as a sole source of support. Always have your own money, she repeated on a few occasions. Do not depend on a man for financial security. She was also very frank about the birds and the bees, saying to me as a pre adolescent, know how to pleasure yourself. Your pleasure belongs to you and not a man. Perhaps my grandmother was preparing me for a time when she was no longer alive. No one ever said a word to that effect. In my mind, she was going to live forever. That's wild, I guess. The main event of the summer of 1981 gave me a new leap of independence. Now 9 years old, I already was a latchkey kid and walked myself from school daily, rode my bike everywhere, and had free reign in the neighborhood, as long as I was home before dark. This summer, I got a taste of the streets Cali style. Mommy had arranged for me to fly out to visit Rob in his new home in California. He had a new wife and an infant son named Caleb, and a stepdaughter, Regina, who was a few years older than I was. Rob was barely present during that trip because of his job. Plus, he had started drinking again. My stepmother was working all the time and had her hands full when she wasn't. This meant I mostly got to hang out with Regina and all her teenage friends. It was an adventure. Palm trees and sunny skies and cute boys, from tall chocolate drops to low riding cholos. In a short amount of time, I went from flying out in my tidy ponytail, dressed in a cute little outfit designed and made for me by my grandmother, to heading home to Baltimore in some Rick James style cornrows with beads and all. That hairdo changed my life. I felt like I was a real deal teenager, like Regina. I loved swinging my hair as the beads bounced against each other in a click clack clack sound. Spoiler alert. Grandmother took one look at me when I got back, had a fit, and made me take out the braids and beads on the spot. I had to resort back to my kitty pigtails that in no way fit my new persona of I ain't no little kid no more. But those cornrows left me with a different kind of confidence. Not long after I returned from Cali, Mommy announced out the blue that she was marrying Tony. They'd been dating a while, and now the three of us were going down to the courthouse to make it official. Mommy studied my face to gauge my reaction. I did not hide that I was unhappy. The thought of us sharing space with someone other than my grandparents was, let's say, not desirable. I was used to it being just her and me, and even though there had been a series of boyfriends in her life, they had never moved in. Plus, they were never around often enough to tell me what to do. Now I was going to have somebody trying to be my daddy, and I have to vie for mommy's attention and time. Nope. My mother was so happy and sure that this was the right thing to do. I accepted that I had no say in the matter. I would just have to deal. All I could do was smile, be as pleasant as I could, while I stood in the courthouse and posed for pictures. The last thing I wanted to do was rain on my mother's parade, but I just wasn't feeling it. Through all the smiles and romantic I do's and forevers, I just kept thinking, we'll see. Tony wore my resistance down very quickly, and I will forever be grateful that mom brought him into our lives. He filled the void, without question, and much to my surprise, he was a kindred spirit. Tony was Mr. Go, 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 as much on the move as I always wanted to be. A lawyer who had worked in Tennessee and was studying for the Maryland bar while working as a legal aid, he had energy that was big and dynamic. He was coming up in his field, soon to become prosecutor for the state's attorney, and he was completely in support of my mother's work to become a fully licensed RN. Tony was a big kid at heart with a twinkle in his eye, a fantastic sense of humor, and an infectious laugh. He had his own brand of charisma and could charm most people in an instant. Grandmother really dug him. He was a hungry, ambitious young lawyer with the potential to make it big, and he fit perfectly into grandmother's picture of whom her daughter was meant to have as a husband. Tony was undeniably fun. Plus, as a male figure, He brought a level of security to the dynamic with my mom that I haven't felt before, outside of the influence of my grandfathers. I was new to this traditional kind of stability and consistency outside of Marion's house, and I had to admit it felt very nice. Mommy and I would finally have a safe home of our own, full of family love. The first place we shared with Tony was a roach infested row house in northeast Baltimore. No matter how often the exterminator came and sprayed that stinky, oily poison, the roaches just went to the row house connected to us that wasn't so clean, and they chilled until the coast was clear. They always returned. I love all living creatures, but I ain't no fan of roaches. I can imagine how ecstatic I was to find. Can you imagine how ecstatic I was to find out we would be moving into a brand new house, also in Northeast Baltimore? Tony was climbing the ladder professionally, and his brother, a contractor, had renovated this home, and Tony was going to buy it. When he took us to see it the first time, Mommy couldn't hide her excitement. Tony glanced at me. You like it? Is this our new house? Tony nodded. I was wide-eyed. It was an open plan and everything was modern, airy and bright. The house had a sparkling kitchen and a beautiful backyard. My bedroom was like something from a magazine. I couldn't believe it. Tony was clearly on his own way to being the ideal husband and father that I'd never had. Tony was short with a square little head and a sharp intellect. He was a criminal lawyer, so he could read a person or a situation in a flash. Oh, and he could talk circles around people. But that was to be expected. That's what he did for a living. I became fascinated with the law and loved how Tony strategized for every case differently. In his career, he worked as both a prosecutor and a public defender, but whichever side it was, these weren't small civil cases. These were hardcore criminal crimes, including violent murders. While Tony studied his latest case, I had a habit of snooping over his shoulder as he immersed himself in the paperwork. One time I found my eyes glued to a gruesome photograph in the evidence file he was reviewing, and he felt me looking. He glanced up from his work and asked, Do you want to see? I excitedly nodded. He showed me the shots of a murder scene and gave me his theory of the case and his strategy for proving it. From then on, I asked about his latest case, and he never shied away from giving me the full story and how he was going to prosecute the defendant. He even took me to court a few times because I was so interested. He loved how inquisitive I was and enjoyed how much I enjoyed what he did. Not only did Tony spark in me a lasting interest in law, he also introduced me to my lifelong love of road trips. He was he was ready for an adventure whenever the mood struck. Mom couldn't just get up and go while working and attending school for her RN license at the same time. So Tony and I became full-time running buddies. I went wherever he went. Road trip? Hell yeah. We went all over the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic to visit his college buddies or relatives. It might be a day trip or a weekend ride, but we were on the road to somewhere exciting every chance we got. Tony really did go every extra mile, no pun intended, to be a positive male presence in our household. With mom's schedule, it sometimes seemed like Tony was my primary caregiver. The highlight of the week came every Sunday when we would go have dinner with Tony's mother, Mrs. White, who was gentle and kind and whom I liked very much. Tony took a lot of pride in looking out for his mom, and I always admired that. The least fun we had was doing homework, but he rose to the challenge, a treacherous task, because I was a struggling, easily frustrated student. English, social studies, and anything remotely connected to creativity were all easy. Math, though, made no sense. I could add, subtract, divide, and multiply, but math word problems offended me. A visual, tactile learner, I couldn't get a concept from being told how to get it, and you had to show me. Tony was patient and consistent, but it didn't change the fact that I was neither. We almost always got along, but inevitably we had a classic father daughter conflict that really upset me. In middle school, there was a boy, taller than I was and very thin, who taunted and bullied me every day. Whenever he railed on me, I tried to play it cool and reported it to my teachers. Nothing happened. Then one day in the library, of all places, this fool got in my face while pushing past my physical comfort zone. He pointed his pointed finger almost touched my nose. Well, that's all I needed to jump on him. As if possessed, I went full red. All I remember were the library aides pulling me off him. We were immediately sent to the principal's office. The boy had visible scratches on his face and neck, which the principal took to mean that he had all the injuries and therefore she needed to come down on me. I had lost several fights already in elementary school with the scars to prove it, but not this one. I pleaded. I kept telling my teacher he was messing with me and nobody did anything. He got in my face. My principal barked, "Watch your tone or you'll be in more trouble than you are now." I actually liked the principal. I found her fair, but in this case, she was wrong. I had a right to protect myself, and nobody was going to change my mind on that. It was what I had been taught. When I got home, Warren Anthony Brown went in on me like he never had before. Before I could finish my defense, he sternly countered, "Are you crazy? You were fighting a boy. He could have really hurt you if he wanted to." Tony went on and on. I sat in front of him unbothered because I knew I was right. All I could think about this tall, skinny menace was let him touch me again. I'm going to do the same damn thing. Mommy didn't say much. She let Tony take the lead, and I was pissed about that too. I wonder if she could see the bubble over my head. Oh, now I shouldn't fight. You ain't raised me like that. Then the hammer came. I was punished. What? Whatever. Punish me? Tony and I gave each other the silent treatment for damn near 2 weeks. My attitude was written on my face. Who tells a person not to protect themselves when no one else will? This is stupid. This experience was an object lesson for my later journey as a mother. It taught me that one ought not combat a child's determination. Any child of mine would probably have strong willpower, and when the time came, I made a promise to work for understanding with patience instead of trying to break their resolve. And God gave me not one, but three kids with fierce self-determination. Time passed and all was forgiven. We moved on. Everybody got back to their hustle, and Tony's hustle was strong. Mommy's hustle was extra strong at this time. She became an RN, and though Tony knew and I didn't really know it yet, a full-blown high-functioning heroin addict who was holding it all together. The part I saw, their determination and drive, was a gift for me to witness because it revealed how discipline, self-confidence, and willpower can be a potent recipe for success. This example I will also take into my life. Have your kids on your hip on your hustle. You can better show them than tell them. What was my hustle? At 12 years old, I made a moment on stage. I had a moment on stage that made me think performing could really be my thing. It was in a summer program production. This time I had been cast as the lead, Dorothy, in The Wizard of Oz. The house was packed, as I recall. My mother and grandmother Marion were in the crowd, and as was Tony, along with a lot of the family who had come to cheer me on. I was thrilled. And just as I was launching into the final solo of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, I forgot the words. It was a moment when I could have crumbled and ruined the whole show. I could have decided to walk away from the stage forever. Instead, my confidence, willpower, and discipline kicked in as I announced, "I have forgotten the words to the song. Why don't you join in and sing them with me?" And they did. It was as if the moment had been planned. It was as if I was shining a spotlight on an audience which everyone loved. That became one of my proudest memories because I made sure the show went on and barely missed a beat. It was a crash course in the power of "don't let them see you sweat." From then on, my performing aspirations became more serious. I had already began attending the after-school program called Twigs to work in gaining skills at Baltimore School for the Arts, considered a stepping stone to getting into the performing art high school. Just before my 13th birthday, Miami Vice debuted on Friday nights. Tony and I watched every episode together, predicting storylines and delighting in a merger of the traditional cop show format with the latest styles and scenes from MTV. Those Friday nights, while they lasted, were magic, but they soon came to a grinding halt. Suddenly, the world was no longer safe. The one-two punch came in early 1985. Even though Marion had not been well for some time, it was never real to me that at some point she may not be with us, with me. She had survived cancer once, and when it reappeared as bone cancer, I expected that she would survive again. Grandmother was only 70 years old, relatively young. The family was probably in as much denial as I. As long as she could, Marion kept up with the celebrations for holidays and birthdays. I have a memory of one of the last Christmases that we celebrated. For the first and only time, Marion invited Shirley and Grant Pinkett for Christmas dinner with the Banfields. It was as if she felt the importance of closing the circles and fully making peace that year. For all I knew, everything seemed right in the world until the day my Uncle Leslie came to pick me up from school. This was very unusual and gave me an immediate feeling that something was wrong. As I approached him, he calmly gave me the news that grandmother had died. All I could say was, okay. There was a part of me that believed he was mistaken because my grandmother being gone was an impossibility. When we got to her house, Aunt Karen was there and very distraught. Reality hit me hard, and I went upstairs to the attic to ground myself. Shortly after, Karen climbed the stairs and told me that she wanted me to come with her to say goodbye to grandmother. No, was all I could think. I hadn't known that her body was still in the house. My heart shattered. I don't want to. I told Aunt Karen I was scared to see my grandmother dead. That would make it all too real. Karen replied, you have to. This will be your last chance to see her. I know my Aunt Karen meant well, but I wish that I had not gone to see her. As I stood outside her bedroom door, I saw my lifeless grandmother lying on her bed. My grandfather was broken, but doing his best to keep it together. My mother had just arrived, and she was inconsolable. I was frozen in the chaos of grief. Come in closer so you can see her, Jada, Karen urged softly. I took 3 more steps in and vowed I would not step 1 foot closer. In that moment, I had to admit it was good that all the pain caused by the bone cancer, all the moaning and discomfort she suffered through was over. She looked peaceful. I accepted that my grandmother no longer existed in what now seemed to be a shell. All I could do was question how death could be so cruel and not give me the chance to say goodbye. Soon after I lost my grandmother, Tony and Mommy started the process of divorcing. All the solid ground under my little feet disappeared in less than 6 months. Tony did his best. He told me that although he and Mom were divorcing, you are still my daughter. Unfortunately, his reassurance dissolved long before long, more or less after he met a woman who initially tried to be maternal toward me, but soon forbade him any contact with his ex-wife's daughter. I'll never forget receiving a phone call from her when she told me, find your real father, and then hung up on me. She harassed my mother and me endlessly until Grandmother Shirley gave her a call. Shirley told this woman that she knew people in high places and that if she bothered us ever again, she would make her life miserable. We never heard from that woman again, But with that, I didn't hear from Tony either. That rejection was brutal. He was the only active father I ever knew. Having him ripped out of my life was far more devastating than having a man who was my biological parent tell me that he couldn't be my father. Everybody always put so much emphasis on blood being the most important thing when it comes to familial bonds. In my case, the bond I had made with Tony was far more powerful than the blood I shared with Rob. Something broke inside me. My grief was oceanic, so I put it on my library shelf labeled unlovable and tried to leave it there for good. My 13th year was when my life changed drastically and when the Baltimore streets became my home, where I went in search of my power, sense of control, and love. People are not meant to be perfect. We can mourn that fact. But at some point, it's in our benefit to accept it. It's a mighty invitation for healing. My friend's mom. Very rarely do we have the ability as children to see our parents as human, with their own hurts and battles acquired before we came into their lives. Nor do we have the ability to see that their wounds and unhappiness aren't our fault. Too often we have ideal pictures of how parents are supposed to be. Even when we're adults, having to face our parents' humanness can be daunting and deeply painful. Yet the willingness to accept that delivers deep healing. It helps us let go of the childlike fantasy version of the supreme being parental figure. And when we dare to take our parents off their pedestals, we can recognize the influence of generational trauma. This is where knowing the history of our less than perfect parents can be liberating. Many times it is clear that our parents and their parents had unhealed stuff they passed on unwittingly. We then pass that on unless we recognize the cycles. The conscious decision, this stops with me, is the first step. With that comes freedom, which brings internal chaos into order. Having awareness of these toxic cycles is a bold act of self care. Can you recognize the patterns in your life and relationships that stem from inherent trauma cycles? If so, write down which cycles are most important for you to break. How does this awareness make you feel, knowing you don't have to carry that burden anymore? All right, y'all. We're going to stop here and I'll catch y'all soon for chapter 4, University of the Be More Streets.